Attack on Crimea. The largest Russian oil depot in Feodosia has been destroyed. Counteroffensive. 175 square kilometers have been liberated by the Ukrainian armed forces in Donbas. The Russian army is trapped in a hellish cauldron. For the first time in history, Ukrainians shot down a Russian helicopter worth 15 million using FPV drones. Zelensky threatens blackouts in Moscow, while at the same time Belgorod is already without power. Russian drones have once again been spotted over Denmark and Norway. How will NATO respond? Another proof of Russian terrorism. Russian soldiers executed wounded Ukrainian prisoners of war. Trump has authorized long-range strikes on Russia and is preparing to transfer Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. A new war. Russia is arming China for an attack on Taiwan. Hello, my name is Yulia Kokan, and right now, here are the top stories. But first, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so we don't lose each other on YouTube. Meanwhile, things were once again unsettled in Russia. Neptune missiles struck the Russian Karachov electrodietl plant at a distance of about 240 kilometers. This was reported by the Ukrainian Navy.
We are adjusting operations of Russian defense plants, and our Neptune missile again hit the Russian Karachov electrodietl plant precisely. That's one more link in the enemy's supply chain taken out. Everything working against Ukraine is destroyed.
Things were also tense in Voskresensk, near Moscow, where air defense systems were active as well. And as the cherry on top, Russian media report that in Feodosia, which is occupied by the Russians, there was a strike on the Neptune base. Footage from the scene is already circulating online. Like this video if, like me, you want to see more of this kind of footage. The Russians have earned this. During the Dobropilya counteroffensive, Ukraine's defense forces have already liberated 175 square kilometers. At the same time, some Russian units have found themselves surrounded. The commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, Oleksandr Syrsky, reported that another approximately 195 square kilometers have now been cleared of enemy sabotage groups.
According to him, Russian losses amounted to 3,185 personnel, of which 1,769 are irrecoverable. In addition, 969 pieces of weaponry and equipment have been destroyed or put out of action.
And the commander of the Unmanned Systems Forces, Robert Broad de Modia, reported that soldiers of the 59th Brigade, just think about it, using FPV drones costing $1,000, shot down a Russian Mi-28 helicopter worth 15 million. And in fact, regarding the topic of the Russian offensive, Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski told CNN journalists that the Russian offensive has stalled. Because Russia's sheer size works against it, it cannot protect all its facilities with air defense systems. Ukraine
has already attacked half of Russia's oil refineries, complicating the work of the military machine, and Trump likes to support winners. But as for pressure on Russia, more weapons for Ukraine or sanctions against Russia, so far, nothing. Do you expect this to change? We hope that the US will do this because Putin will only stop when he realizes he cannot win. For him to come to such a conclusion, there needs to be more pressure on Russia's economy and more support for Ukrainians. I think the Americans are planning to buy several Ukrainian drones. This is evidence of Ukraine's achievements during this war. This war will probably end like the First World War. One of the sides will run out of resources to continue.
And do you agree with Sikorski? And what do you think? Will the US agree to the proposal to exhaust Russia economically? And now, in our report, the latest events at the front and around it.
They are suffering colossal losses but still keep pushing forward without any results. The Russian army still hasn't given up hope of grabbing at least a small piece of new Ukrainian territory. In the past 24 hours, there have been nearly 200 combat clashes recorded at the front. The Russian invaders have been most active in the Pokrovsk and Novopavlivka directions. Across the entire front line, the enemy carried out 81 airstrikes, dropping 156 guided aerial bombs on Ukraine. Over the past day, the enemy also carried out 5,118 shellings and launched more than 6,000 drones at Ukrainians.
Donetsk region, right now our fighters are working at maximum capacity there, especially drone operators in Donetsk Oblast. Although it should be noted that the concentration of enemy aircraft in Donetsk is also just sky high. There are times when just during patrol mode there are 3 or 4 aircraft in the air, and now it's 24/7.
While the occupiers were striking randomly at peaceful cities and shopping centers, our aviation targeted exclusively military facilities of the Russian army. In particular, the armed forces of Ukraine delivered a high-precision strike on the occupiers' positions in Donbas. According to Ukrainian intelligence, enemy infantry was stationed in 2 buildings, and the 3rd Army Corps sent all its personnel to a Kobzon concert. Meanwhile, in the Pokrovsk direction, our defenders were not hunting Russian infantry, but rather targeting the enemy's expensive heavy equipment. Despite all the crew's efforts, the enemy tank was unable to escape our drones. Overall, in the Pokrovsk direction, Ukrainian defenders have repelled around 60 assaults by the Russian aggressor in the past 24 hours near the settlements of Vladimirovka, Nikonorovka, Krasny Liman, Suketskaya, Novoekonomicheskaya, Nikolaevka, Lisovka, Zvereva, Kotlina, Udakhnaya, Novonikolaevka, Kotliarovka, and Dakhnaya. All enemy attempts to attack the Ukrainian armed forces in the Sumy region were thwarted.
In the Sumy region, absolutely everything has completely and utterly come to a standstill, with all activities ceasing entirely. This is the territory occupied by Russian troops in the Sumy region. It cannot be called a buffer zone.
In the past 24 hours, Russian forces have carried out 6 attacks in the Kupiansk direction. Ukrainian defenders repelled enemy assault actions near the settlement of Petropavlovka and in the direction of Peshanoye and Boguslavka. There, and not only there, the enemy has begun to use a new monstrous tactic. In order to save resources, Kremlin generals have started sending their soldiers into attacks without body armor or proper equipment.
The enemy understands everything perfectly well and is betting on the speed of their movement, lightness, mobility, and so on. That's why this has been noticed more than once. They run to the outskirts and there they start searching and looting their fallen comrades. There they pick up body armor, helmets, and so on.
In this manner, the enemy stormed the positions of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Lyman direction a total of 15 times, trying to break through the defenses near the settlements of Kolodets and Torskay. But in the Dobropoli direction, the enemy is no longer eager to attack. There, on the contrary, they are desperately trying to break out of encirclement.
Here, in the Dobropoli direction, the assault regiments have indeed carried out these encirclements, cutoffs, or created pockets for the occupiers where the Z-War correspondents are fighting. Although, as they say, it's not all that simple, and in some locations, physical expulsion of the enemy is still ongoing. It's still too early to speak of a complete encirclement of the enemy there.
Thanks to the coordination and prompt actions of our defenders, several hundred Russian occupiers were trapped in an improvised pocket, according to the General Staff. Even more invaders were eliminated during the recent battles, the military reports.
Wherever there is an enemy and wherever he is cut off from supplies, that's about 300 square kilometers of territory like this. Now they are spreading in the direction of Dobropilia. According to Zelensky, the occupiers' losses in this operation have already reached nearly 3,000 people, most of whom are irrecoverable. The exchange fund also continues to grow. According to the president, this is what's happening in the north.
Meanwhile, in the east, our border guards continued to terrorize the occupiers. The day before, they managed to set a new record by neutralizing as many as 60 Russian soldiers with drones in just one day. And here, border guards from the Phoenix unit are already striking at the enemy's logistics in the Donetsk region. As a result of the drone raid, our defenders managed to destroy at least 3 motorcycles, a quad bike, a car, and 2 Russian army vans all at once. Among the high-value targets were a truck loaded with ammunition and a T-80 tank. The drone systems unit also boasted about their weekend achievements. The day before, they struck 3 gas distribution stations in the temporarily occupied territory of Luhansk region, which caused disruptions in the area.
Water is barely dripping from the tap, the blue flame in the gas stove is no longer so blue, and before you know it, the chandelier is freezing. That's what happiness looks like, eyes and a sting. The Shchastia gas distribution station in Luhansk region, located in the temporarily occupied territory of Ukraine, is the main source of gas for the Luhansk TPP. The Luhansk TPP has been forced to switch to operating on coal.
But even beyond the curb, the occupiers can't hide from the Ukrainian armed forces and their drones. The proof of this is a new one. A high-profile operation by the Security Service of Ukraine, SBU drones destroyed the Tingovatovo oil pumping station in the Chuvash Republic of the Russian Federation, thousands of kilometers from Ukraine. It is known that the station's operations have been temporarily suspended until the extent of the damage to the facility is determined. However, judging by the rumors, the facility will be out of operation for a very long time.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
I never cease to admire the courage and heroism of Ukrainian soldiers. They are holding the front lines and standing up to a massive horde that vastly outnumbers them. That's why I urge you to support the armed forces of Ukraine. And if you can't do so financially, write them words of support in the comments. I know they're watching us. When Russians threaten Kyiv with a blackout, they should be prepared for a blackout in Moscow as well. In fact, that's how Zelensky responded to the Kremlin's threats and stated that Ukraine would not be the first to attack. Nevertheless, this does not mean that the country will not defend itself and respond to attacks.
Russia must clearly understand that civilized countries differ from barbaric ones in that they never strike first and are not aggressors. But that doesn't mean they are weak. There is no need to show weakness. If they threaten a blackout, for example, in the capital of Ukraine, then the Kremlin should know that there will be a blackout in the capital of Russia.
And whether this was a request to the universe or something else, in any case, a blackout happened in Russia very quickly. However, for now, not in Moscow, but in Belgorod. Last night, locals reported powerful explosions. Later, it became known that unknown missiles struck the Belgorod CHP plant and the Luch electrical substation. A little later, Russians began to complain that the city had lost power, water, and even the internet.
Povlad, this is Belgorod, basically. There's no power, there's none at all anywhere in Belgorod.
The governor of Belgorod region, Vyacheslav Gladkov, confirmed the strike on the infrastructure and even admitted that the city is facing serious problems with electricity supply. He also reported that due to the power outage, sirens in Belgorod will not sound and local residents will not be aware of missile threats or drone attacks.
Dear friends, the enemy has struck the infrastructure. We are currently assessing the damage. There are quite significant disruptions in the electricity supply.
But still, there were those who, during the blackout in Belgorod, as they say, really dropped the ball. Yes, Rossetti, that is, Russian energy workers reported that the blackout in Belgorod happened because of bad weather. Meanwhile, we would like to thank the unfavorable weather conditions, in other words, the Ukrainian Defense Forces, for a job well done. Trump authorized Ukraine to carry out long-range strikes on targets inside Russian territory. This was stated on Fox News by the U.S. Special Envoy for Ukraine, Keith Kellogg.
I just want to clarify, are you saying that the president's position is that Ukraine can conduct long-range strikes on Russia? Was this authorized by the president? I think that having read what he said, as well as what Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio said, the answer is yes. Use the opportunity to carry out long-range strikes. There are no shelters. That's one of the reasons why I believe President Zelensky asked Trump last week to get Tomahawk missiles which provide depth. They are really good systems. America makes the best. Are we giving them Tomahawks? That decision has not been made yet. But I know that Zelensky really did request this and that it was confirmed by Vance's post on social media. It will depend on the president.
And of course, Russia had to chime in as well. Putin's press secretary, Dmitry Peskov, told journalists that if the U.S. supplies Ukraine with long-range Tomahawk cruise missiles, it will not affect the course of hostilities.
Even if it turns out that the U.S. supplies Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, nothing will change on the front. Tomahawks will not be able to alter the dynamics.
What do you think prompted Trump to make this decision? And why, so to speak, has the ice only started to move on this issue now? Denmark scrambled 2 F-35 fighter jets due to numerous reports of unidentified drones. The publication Berlingske writes that the planes flew several times over the island of Bornholm as part of a diversionary operation. This was later confirmed by the country's police. However, the Danish armed forces declined to comment on this information.
In the evening, the police received many reports about drones. Law enforcement officials stated that the main reason was the starry sky. Since the beginning of the year, the interception system has been triggered 33 times. All activations were recorded over the Baltic Sea. Last week, Denmark also recorded flights of unmanned aerial vehicles over airports and military facilities.
Because of drones, Norway also had to turn passenger planes around. It is known that a passenger flight from Oslo to Bardufoss was forced to turn back in the evening due to the appearance of a drone in the airport area. It is also known that earlier drones were spotted over the restricted area near Brønnøysund Airport. And on September 27th, unmanned aerial vehicles were recorded over the Ørland military airbase. For his part, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is convinced that violations of European airspace are a worrying trend that threatens all of Europe. According to him, Russia is trying to divide the allies.
You saw that Estonia, Poland, Denmark, Norway and Sweden received some signals. I'm not saying these couldn't be isolated or large-scale attacks. No, I'm talking about trends. There's no smoke without fire. Signals of airspace violations in Europe are not isolated incidents, but a worrying trend. This is not just about threats to individual countries, but about the security of all of Europe. The response must be unified by the EU, NATO and the US together. Russia is trying to divide the allies, but it is precisely a united stance that can deter aggression. The risks also extend to the countries of the former USSR. Moldova has managed to choose the European path, but the threat remains, just as it does for Kazakhstan and other states. That's why we need to be prepared for new challenges.
In short, it seems that Russian drones are no longer just, so to speak, testing the red lines. They are actively shifting them. Ukraine's main intelligence directorate published an intercepted conversation between a Russian soldier and his commander.
Who's on duty there? 2 assholes at Trenovitz. Hello? Hello. V.
In the intercepted conversation, the commander of the Russian unit gives the order to execute 2 captured Ukrainian soldiers. At the same time, judging by the context of the Russian soldiers' report, it can be understood that both Ukrainian defenders were wounded and unarmed. Here is yet another piece of evidence of another war crime committed by the Russian Federation. Russia and its astronauts are fighting like terrorists. In the elections in Moldova, the pro-European party of President Sandu won, while the pro-Russian opposition lost. And now let's go through everything step by step. On Sunday, parliamentary elections were held in Moldova. According to the results, after counting 100% of the votes, as reported on the website of the Moldovan Central Election Commission, the ruling pro-European Action and Solidarity Party of the current president, Maia Sandu, won, receiving 50.20% of the votes, which gives it 55 out of 101 seats in parliament. Another pro-European political organization, the Alternative Bloc, will, according to preliminary data, receive 8 mandates. And the pro-Russian Patriotic Bloc, according to the calculations of the Electoral Commission, received 24.17% of the votes, which gives it 26 parliamentary seats. The president of Moldova, Maia Sandu, also made a statement regarding the election results.
The results of the vote are a victory for our country. This victory must be directed toward the good, for our benefit. Sandu
stated that during the election there were instances of fraud and that the aggressor country, Russia, had a significant influence on the election. But despite this, the citizens chose a pro-European political direction. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has already congratulated Maia Sandu on her party's victory in the parliamentary elections. He did this over the phone. At the same time, Zelensky emphasized that Russian subversive activities and constant disinformation during these elections did not work.
I spoke with the president of Moldova, Maia Sandu. I am glad to congratulate Maia on this very important victory and wish her success. These elections have proven that Russian destabilizing activity is losing, while Moldova in Europe is winning. Russian subversive activities and constant disinformation, none of that worked. It is important that Moldova was effective in defending itself against threats, together with everyone who helped. We always support Moldova and will continue to work together in the future. Together, we are overcoming challenges and building a future where our peoples have good prospects in all areas.
Following the results of the elections in Moldova, the head of the Center for Countering Disinformation of the National Security and Defense Council, Alexander Kovalenko, wrote an entire post on his Telegram page.
The parliamentary elections in Moldova have become a serious signal for the Kremlin. President Sandu's party won the majority and can form the government independently. All power is now concentrated in the hands of the pro-Western force. The pro-Russian patriotic bloc of Dodon suffered a defeat, receiving less than a quarter of the votes. Russia spent resources supporting its projects in Chisinau and lost. The oversight by Dmitry Kozak and his successor Sergei Kirienko did not work. Even in Moldova, there is no longer any prospect for friendship with Russia. The Kremlin has lost Moldova, just previously lost Armenia, Azerbaijan, the Baltic states, and Ukraine.
Meanwhile, in Moldova, the soundly defeated pro-Russian forces decided to organize a rally. At the protest, they are already hysterically chanting, "Ukraine will not be in charge here." At one point, a man in the square shouted, "Glory to Ukraine," after which he was quickly escorted out of the area. Representatives of the Patriotic Bloc Party claim that there were alleged violations during the elections and that the victory of Maia Sandu's political force is the fault of the diaspora. What do you think Russia's next step might be in response to the victory of Sandu's pro-European party? Share your thoughts in the comments. Russia has armed and is preparing China for a landing on Taiwan. Beijing has fully acquired a battalion set of BMD-4S and Sprott light tanks. This is reported by Defense Express. The article states that despite China having a huge army of 2 million people, which it is fully capable of arming on its own, Beijing secretly purchased from Russia a set of airborne equipment intended for a reinforced airborne battalion and also prepared a full staff of Chinese military personnel. The purchase agreement was concluded in 2023, which became known thanks to a leak of correspondence obtained by the hacker group Black Moon, and the analysis of about 800 pages of information was carried out by the reputable British Royal United Services Institute.
According to this information, China purchased 37 BMD-4Ms, 11 Sprut SDM-1S, 11 BTR-MDM Rakushkas, several command and staff vehicles produced by NPP Rubin, several mobile artillery command posts called Riostat, a certain number of Arlen-10 UAVs, parachute systems, long-range aircraft, and all the equipment is to be fitted with Chinese communication systems.
Defense Express writes that along with the equipment, technical documentation is being provided for independent maintenance and modernization of the weapons and military hardware. At the same time, all the equipment purchased from Russia is intended for airdrop from military transport aircraft of the IL-76 type, of which China has about 75. Additionally, by training its military personnel in Russia, China has gained extra knowledge on the use of airborne units and ready-made tools. In other words, this was a turnkey solution sale. What do you think Russia and China are really planning? Write your thoughts in the comments, don't hold back. Ukraine's attacks on the oil and gas sector have caused Russia $100 billion in damages, according to the British tabloid The Sun. Military expert Philip Ingram believes that these attacks undermine Putin's war machine and make the war tangible for ordinary Russians. Rising fuel prices and shortages at gas stations directly affect their daily lives. According to him, strikes on the oil industry could cause a serious fuel shortage and put enormous pressure on Moscow's ability to continue fighting.
Long-range drones covering more than 1,000 kilometers are turning Russia's great oil and gas empire into a chain of infernal flames.
The military expert added that strikes on oil refineries directly reduced the Kremlin's revenues. Before the full-scale invasion, energy exports accounted for about 40% of Russia's budget. Now it's around 30%, despite the sanctions. Ingram also noted that Ukraine's successes in such operations may have been made possible thanks to coordination with Western partners and insiders who helped identify the most vulnerable elements of critical infrastructure. Well, what can I say? Great news. Let's wait for more to come. For the blind Hungarian officials, Ukraine's chief diplomat Andriy Sybiha demonstrated the route of the Hungarian drone in Ukrainian airspace. "Stop picking on us," retorted Prime Minister Viktor Orban on his social media. Tensions between the official Kyiv and Budapest are growing by the day. Next, let's talk about what Ukraine and Hungary are accusing each other of and what this could mean for both sides.
Espionage in favor of Moscow, provocation for personal interests, or simply the inept work of drone operators. A few days later, instead of explaining what their drones were doing in Ukrainian airspace, Hungary chose the familiar Kremlin tactic of denial. It wasn't us.
Admitting this publicly, of course, is not in the interests of the Hungarian government.
However, the story of the Hungarian drone in Ukraine is only gaining momentum, with more and more facts emerging.
One drone has been detected and there is corresponding movement. By the way, I asked them to show people because they say we're making things up.
In response, an official statement from Budapest followed. They claimed that Zelensky is seeing ghosts and that there was no drone at all. To this, our foreign ministry responded not just with accusations, but with a confirmed route of the Hungarian UAV, demanding an explanation for what had happened.
For the blind Hungarian officials, here is the exact route of yesterday's drone incursion from Hungary into Ukrainian airspace. Our armed forces have gathered all the necessary evidence and we are still waiting for an explanation from Hungary as to what this object was doing in our airspace.
At the same time, our military and analysts have provided their own explanations. So, according to one version, Hungary may have staged this provocation as a way to somehow take revenge on Ukraine for the sabotage of the Druzhba oil pipeline. And not without advice from their partner on the other side of the pipeline.
I strongly suspect that Orban is simply copying Putin's tactics. Just as Putin is now launching drones against Western countries, this first happened against Poland. Now we are seeing unidentified drones flying over some northern countries, Denmark, Norway, Sweden. They've also been spotted in northern France, and no one can figure out what these drones are or where they're coming from.
At the same time, another Russian connection in this story has already been uncovered by investigative journalists. So, within a few hours of each other, Hungarian media controlled by Orban and Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova made almost identical statements. They claimed that, in response to the drone incursion, Ukraine would now send its own drones to Europe, specifically to Romania and Poland. However, these drones will be Russian, assembled from parts of downed Shahids in Ukraine. In other words, if something happens in the West involving Russian drones, just know in advance it was Kyiv.
Judging by
the way the propaganda is being presented, how they're trying to downplay their
threats, I wouldn't rule out the possibility that there will be some serious
attack.
I saw a detailed review of exactly how they conduct their operations.
Work on social media, and Russian bots are promoting not the idea that they need to defend themselves,
or that Ukraine should actually be given less financial assistance,
but rather they are downplaying the danger of these attacks. So this could mean that they are preparing something more
serious. Another theory as to why a Nigerian drone arrived in Ukraine is simply reconnaissance work in the interests of Moscow.
Many military experts note that in this way, reconnaissance information is gathered, which is simply transmitted or sold to Moscow. Unfortunately, this is also possible.
And unfortunately, there is already indirect evidence to support this. After all, following a recent similar incident during a subsequent Russian strike, the attack was carried out specifically on Zakarpattia.
There are already
confirmed pieces of compelling evidence that they had previously and repeatedly violated Ukraine's sovereign airspace as well, if it is definitively proven that at that crucial time in Zakarpattia, they specifically targeted an American company that was actively producing coffee machines there, then I truly think Trump's effusive praise for Korban will dramatically change, and he will most certainly have to answer for it, facing significant consequences.
Zelensky also noted that such reconnaissance activity along the route of the Hungarian drone is highly suspicious. He refrained from making direct accusations, but it was clear from his hints that Kyiv understands everything and that things were not so simple.
It's very important what they are studying. It's very important that the Hungarian intelligence officer is studying things on Ukrainian territory. In principle, I understand and I believe that they are doing very dangerous things first and foremost for themselves.
So, what about the main culprit of the celebration? After the verbal spat between our foreign ministries, Viktor Orban also decided to make a statement, though it would have been better if he had stayed silent.
Hungary is a member of NATO and the EU. Ukraine would have fallen long ago without the support of NATO and the EU. Mr. Zelensky, with all due respect, stop bothering us.
By the way, I'd like to add that without EU support, Hungary wouldn't even be standing. Orban's regime has existed for years solely thanks to European Union subsidies. And the more provocations come from Budapest, the greater the chances that Hungary will be left without this support.
The British newspaper, The Sunday Times, published the names of 13 Russian officers responsible for the mass crime in Bucha at the beginning of the full-scale Russian invasion. The publication writes that the scale of killings and torture of civilians by Russian occupiers in Bucha during the 29 days of occupation was so significant that the city has forever become synonymous with war crimes.
In those 29 days at the beginning of 2022, they committed such atrocities that this Ukrainian city will forever become synonymous with war crimes.
The Sunday Times names 13 Russian commanders responsible for the war crime in Bucha. Their identities were established by independent legal researchers using open sources. All 13 were confirmed by the Security Service of Ukraine. 8 out of the 13 names were confirmed by the Prosecutor General's office. The remaining 5 men were identified through reports from their subordinates, cross-referenced with publicly available Russian military records. They have not yet been officially charged. Among the suspects is Colonel General Alexander Chaiko, commander of Russia's Eastern Military District. Before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, he led Russian troops in Syria. One of his subordinates was Sergei Chubarikin, commander of Russia's 76th Division. At the time the crimes in Bucha were committed, he was 41 years old. He commanded the 76th Guards Air Assault Division, which is part of the Eastern Military District. Among the 13 suspects of war crimes in Bucha is 28-year-old Lieutenant Nikolai Sakovikov of the 5th Guards Tank Brigade. He was sentenced in absentia to life imprisonment in Kyiv. Human rights activists have also identified Sakovikov's commander as Colonel Andrei Kondrov. The list of Russian commanders involved in the killings and torture in Bucha also includes Colonel General Valery Solochuk, Colonel General Alexander Sanchik, Colonel Denis Suvorov, Colonel Alexei Tolmachev, Major General Vladimir Selevestrov, Major General Vadim Pankov, Colonel Sergei Karasyov. I hope that each of them receives the punishment they deserve, like if you agree. What do you think of our news? Let us know what we should change to become better. We'll definitely take your feedback into account. In the meantime, please like this video to support what we do and be sure to subscribe to our channel, Ukraine Today, so you don't miss our next episodes. See you soon!